On the night of June 17th, 1993, long before the sun would rise over the flat Oklahoma horizon, 15 diesel engines sat quietly on State Highway 152. Their chrome grills faced east like a row of silent metal beasts waiting for dawn. Every headlight was turned off. Every cabin was dark. The trucks formed an unbroken barricade across the entire highway, blocking it so completely that not even a motorcycle could slip between them. But if you have the courage to hear this story, leave your like and subscribe to the channel. Inside the cabs, the men waited, drinking coffee from metal thermoses, tapping ash from cheap cigarettes into plastic bottles, checking their watches every few minutes. Some talked quietly over CB radios. Others sat in silence, listening to the distant hum of wind turbines from the fields beyond. But all 15 of them were there for the same reason: to make their stand, to prove they weren't disposable, to force the state to acknowledge their anger. What they didn't expect was that their blockade would bring 3 men, 3 brothers, into a violent collision course with them, the Harris brothers. By the end of the night, 15 drivers would be dead, and the event would be remembered as the opening shot in what truckers later called the Oklahoma Freight War. But before the blood, before the gunfire, before the Harris name became whispered in rest stops from Amarillo to St. Louis, everything began with something deceptively small: a blocked supply road and a storm rolling in across the prairie. The sky was still clear when the trucks parked, but to the west, above the distant hills, blackness was gathering. A summer thunderstorm, one of those ugly ones that hit the Great Plains like a freight train, fast, violent, and without mercy. The wind began to pick up, sliding across the buffalo grass in a low hiss. By midnight, the plains would be pitch black. At 9:22 p.m., Shane Harris saw the blockade first. He had been driving a massive flatbed carrying a turbine shaft the size of a small submarine, oversized, overweight, and worth enough money to save their dying business. When he rounded the bend 2 miles east of Binger, he slammed his fist on the steering wheel so hard that the CB microphone rattled. "Tom," Shane said into the radio, "you're not going to believe this." Static crackled for a moment. Then the steady, gravelly voice of his oldest brother came through. "What's wrong?" "The road's blocked. The whole damn thing." Behind Shane, 2 more trucks approached. Tom in the lead, Gary behind him. The 3 trucks were the entire fleet of Harris Hauling and Recovery, a family operation that had survived droughts, tornado seasons, fuel crises, and the slow death of rural America. But they couldn't survive this. This turbine haul was their lifeline. A single delay could kill the contract. And without the contract, the company would collapse within months. Shane climbed out of his truck and walked toward the blockade. The wind pushed at his shirt. The air smelled like hot dust and summer rain. The 15 rigs ahead of him looked like a steel fortress. He shouted up toward the nearest cabin, "Hey, need through!" A man leaned out the window, shirtless, his hair matted with sweat. "Not tonight," the driver said. "We're shut down here till morning." "Protest." "Move 1 truck." Shane's jaw was tight. "Just 1 lane. We're hauling emergency load." "No exceptions," the man replied. "Not till sunrise." Shane clenched a fist at his side. "We've got $1 million turbine behind us. We're on a deadline." "Ain't my problem," the driver called back. "Should have planned for delays." Shane stared up at him for a long moment, the muscles in his jaw grinding. The driver looked away, clearly dismissing him. That dismissal, that casual, thoughtless flick of the eyes, was the spark that lit something deep and dangerous in Shane's chest. He turned and walked back toward his brothers. Tom and Gary had stepped out of their trucks and were waiting for him at the edge of the road. "Well?" Tom asked. "They said no." "Did you tell them what we're hauling?" Gary asked. "Didn't matter." Gary took off his cap, ran a hand through his thinning hair, and put it back on. Anxiety flickered across his face, but he said nothing. Tom, meanwhile, studied the blockade with eyes that had seen war, real war, before he ever drove his first mile of freight. He didn't speak for several seconds. Then he walked toward the front of their lead truck, away from the headlights, into the growing darkness. Shane followed him. "They don't care about the turbine," Shane said quietly. "They think they're making a statement." Tom didn't reply. Instead, he stared west toward the incoming storm. The sky flashed faintly with distant lightning. "We need this run, Tom," Shane said. "Without it, we're done." Tom nodded slowly. The bitterness of the last 2 years, contract losses, cutthroat rates, rising insurance costs, corporate carriers underbidding small companies to the point of starvation, had been eating away at all of them. The Harris brothers had given their lives to the road, racked up millions of miles, missed holidays, slept in trucks through freezing winters, patched tires in the middle of tornado warnings, survived wrecks, breakdowns, and blizzards. Yet somehow, they were still on the verge of losing everything. All because the system had turned on men like them. And now 15 drivers, 15 men who should have been allies, were blocking their last chance. Tom exhaled slowly. "Get back in the truck," he said. Shane blinked. "What are we doing?" Tom looked at him, really looked at him. And in that moment, Shane understood. His brother wasn't angry. He wasn't shouting. He wasn't shaking. He was calm, too calm. "We're finishing the job," Tom said. Shane felt his stomach drop. "Tom, they want to shut down? Fine. Tonight we shut them down." Gary approached, having heard enough to know something was wrong. "Tom, don't say what I think you're saying." Tom looked at him with the same calm, steady eyes he'd had since Vietnam, the eyes of a man who had learned what it meant to lose everything. "They stood in our way," he said. "They knew what we were hauling. They knew we couldn't afford a delay. They did it anyway." Lightning flashed again, closer this time. The wind grew louder. Gary whispered, "We can turn back. Use another route." "There is no other route," Tom said. "Not in time." For several seconds, the three brothers stood there in silence, the wind whipping at their clothes, the black storm rolling in. Then Tom spoke again. "Get your rifles." Shane swallowed hard. Gary closed his eyes. The storm clouds smothered the moon, plunging the plains into darkness. 15 men waited in those trucks. But none of them knew that the Harris brothers were already walking back to their rigs, retrieving the weapons they'd kept locked away for emergencies, the ones they hoped never to use. None of the drivers expected violence that night. And none of them knew it was already too late. The wind carried the first dust of the storm as the Harris brothers walked back toward their trucks. Gravel crunched under their boots. The darkness was almost complete now. No moon, no stars, just the low growl of thunder rolling across the plains. Shane opened the passenger side toolbox of his flatbed and lifted out a long, heavy rifle case. The latch clicked in the wind. He hesitated for only a moment before pulling it open. Inside was a .30-06 bolt-action rifle, polished wood stock, scope aligned with surgical precision. Tom had given it to him 10 years earlier with the words, "Use it to protect yourself, or to protect something worth more than you." Tonight was both. Gary opened the side compartment of his truck and removed a shorter weapon, a 12-gauge pump shotgun, reliable, simple, and devastating up close. He looked down at it with shaking hands. He was the brother who avoided fights, who read DOT regulation books for fun, who hated raising his voice. But tonight, even Gary knew there was no turning back. Tom didn't bring a weapon from his truck. He had something else, a revolver he kept inside a leather chest holster under his jacket. An old .357, heavy as a brick, passed down from a man who'd survived 2 wars and a lifetime of bad decisions. Tom never talked about the revolver's history, but the way he handled it made one thing clear. He knew exactly what it was capable of. The 3 brothers gathered near the edge of the road behind the cover of their trucks. The wind howled now, bending the tall grass until it whispered against the asphalt. The blockade ahead of them remained calm, unaware, parked in a perfect line of dark silhouettes. "They're just drivers," Gary whispered, his voice trembling. "Guys like us." "No," Tom said softly. "Guys like us wouldn't do this. Not to people trying to make a living." Shane looked toward the barricade, his jaw tight, his fingers drumming against the rifle. "They don't think we'll do anything." "They're wrong," Tom said. Lightning split the sky for a brief moment, illuminating the blockade. In that flash, the outline of each truck became clear. 15 rigs, 15 cabs, 15 men inside. Then darkness swallowed everything again. Tom took a slow breath. "Here's how it's going to go." Shane leaned in. Gary swallowed hard, listening. Tom continued, his voice steady. No talking, no warnings, no negotiation. "We take out the ones in the front first, then the ones in the back. Then we walk the line." Gary flinched. "Tom, you know what happens if they stop us tonight," Tom said, turning to him. "We lose the contract, we lose the company, we lose everything Dad built." Shane looked at Gary, adding quietly, "We can't go home and tell the old man we let 15 boys in trucks ruin his last shot." The wind moaned and pushed dirt across the pavement. Gary looked down at the shotgun. His voice was barely audible. "We're really doing this." Tom nodded once. Shane chambered a round in the rifle. The click was swallowed by the wind. Tom placed a hand on each of their shoulders, steadying them like he had when they were kids about to do something dangerous. "Stay behind cover. Take clean shots. We're not savages." The irony of that sentence would haunt every witness who learned what happened that night. The brothers separated, taking positions. Shane moved along the left side of the road, blending with the tall grass and shadows. His boots sank slightly into the soft earth with each step. He crouched low, raising his rifle, feeling the wind tug at his jacket. Gary stood behind the front bumper of his truck, gripping the shotgun like it might break apart in his hands. Tom remained near the center, half concealed by the turbine load, watching the blockade, the way a soldier watches an enemy trench. The time for hesitation had passed. The first shot came from Shane. It punched through the windshield of the lead truck with a violent crack. The sound echoed across the plains, carried by the storm. A second shot followed almost instantly, then a third. The driver in the first cab jerked backward, slamming against the seat before collapsing out of sight. Shane moved to the next target. His breathing was steady, his pulse unhurried. He fired again, and the second driver slumped forward. Then a third, then a fourth. His shots were precise, cold, practiced, unflinching. From behind the Harris trucks, the muzzle flash of Tom's revolver strobed across the dark. Tom stepped out from behind the load and fired into the cabs one by one. The heavy rounds shattered glass, tore through metal, and dropped. Drivers before, most even knew they were under attack. Gary, who had been frozen, finally lifted his shotgun as one of the barricade drivers opened a door and stumbled out, screaming for help. Gary fired. The blast lit up the pavement. The man crumpled instantly. Gary's hands shook so violently afterward that he nearly dropped the shotgun. Inside the blockade, chaos erupted. Drivers screamed. CB radios crackled with panicked voices. Someone shouted for everyone to start their engines. Another yelled for backup. Another begged God. But in the storm-dark plains, nobody was coming. Nobody could see what was happening, and no one would arrive in time. Shane moved with lethal efficiency, each shot dropping another silhouette behind cracked glass. He no longer saw faces. He saw threats, obstacles, the destruction of everything their family built. Every bullet was a statement. You shouldn't have stood in our way. Another flash of lightning illuminated the highway. For a split second, the carnage was visible. Shattered windshields, bodies slumped over steering wheels, doors hanging open, blood splattering across dashboards. Then darkness took it back. Tom advanced on the blockade like a man exorcising demons. He reloaded the revolver, fired 3 more shots, reloaded again. His face was blank, expressionless. Not rage, not panic, just grim purpose. Gary stumbled forward a few feet, unsure whether to retreat or help. He fired at a driver who tried to run, the shotgun bucking against his shoulder. The man dropped, rolling across the asphalt. Gary froze. The realization hit him like the wind. He had just taken a life. His breath caught. He tried to speak. Nothing came out. Shane's rifle cracked again. Another driver collapsed. Another. 15 men had formed the blockade that night. 15 men who thought nothing would happen, who believed they were safe behind steel and darkness. They were wrong. Thunder rumbled overhead, drowning the screams. Rain finally broke through the clouds, falling in heavy sheets. The wind carried the smell of cordite, diesel, and blood. The blockade was no longer a line of defiance. It was a graveyard. And in that darkness, in that storm, the Harris brothers kept moving until the last voice in the blockade went silent. When the gunfire stopped, the only sound left was the rain hammering the hoods of the trucks and the wind dragging the storm eastward. Shane lowered his rifle. Gary stood trembling, unable to move. Tom looked down the long stretch of destroyed blockade and said quietly, almost inaudibly, "The road's clear." None of them spoke after that. They simply walked back toward their trucks, stepping through puddles that turned red when the storm water mixed with blood. The Oklahoma freight war had just begun. The storm eased by the time the Harris brothers reached their trucks again, though the wind still pushed ragged sheets of rain across the empty highway. The air smelled of wet asphalt, diesel fumes, and gunpowder. Lightning flickered somewhere far off, illuminating the horizon in split-second flashes like the flick of a dying light bulb. Shane leaned his rifle against the side of his flatbed and pressed both hands against the metal, breathing hard. He wasn't exhausted. He was trying to steady himself. His pulse was strong, his hands slick with rain and something darker. The enormity of what they'd done hadn't hit him yet. Not fully. His body was still in the state between instinct and shock. Gary, on the other hand, was barely standing. He crouched near the front tire of Tom's truck, both hands braced against his knees, the shotgun hanging uselessly from his elbow. His glasses were bent from recoil. He wasn't sure when it happened. His face shone with rain, but the red smeared across his cheek wasn't from the storm. Tom approached him first. He placed a hand on Gary's shoulder. Not a comforting gesture, but a stabilizing one. "You breathing?" Tom asked. Gary nodded, but the nod was shaky, uncontrolled. How many did we—" "Enough," Tom said sharply. "Don't think about it right now." Gary swallowed hard. "Tom, we can't undo this." "No," Tom said. "We can't." A long silence followed. The wind pulled at the hem of Tom's jacket as he finally stepped away and walked toward the turbine load. The steel cylinder glistened with rain, as if nature itself was trying to wipe the blood from the night. Tom wiped water from the strap holding the load down and checked its position, as if this were just another run, just another night, just another problem to solve. Shane finally spoke, his voice low. "They deserved it." Gary's head snapped up. "No, they didn't." "Shane, Jesus, they didn't deserve this. They stood in our way. They were protesting freight rates. They weren't trying to kill us." "They might as well have," Shane shouted, slamming his palm against the metal. "You know what losing this contract means." Gary flinched, running a trembling hand through his wet hair. "But this? 15 men, Shane. 15. Lightning flashed again, briefly illuminating the fear in Gary's eyes, and the absence of it in Shane's. Tom interrupted before either brother could say more. "We finished the run." Gary stared at him in disbelief. "Finish the run?" "We don't leave the turbine," Tom said. "We don't abandon the contract. We don't let this be for nothing." Shane nodded, wiping rain from his mouth. "He's right. We keep moving." Gary stood, gripping the shotgun so hard his knuckles turned white. "Tom, think. This is murder. This isn't a fight at a bar. This isn't a broken deal. This is survival," Tom said. The single word hung in the air like smoke. Shane exhaled slowly. "What now?" Tom looked down the highway toward the now silent blockade. The cabs were dark. The bodies inside slumped under the dim glow of dashboard lights. Rain drummed against the metal roofs in steady, hollow taps. "Now," Tom said, "we clear the path." Shane stepped forward, tense. "You mean "Move the trucks," Tom said. "One by one. Get them off the highway. Into the ditch if you have to. But we're not leaving this mess here for the world to trip over before morning." Gary blinked. "Tom, that'll take hours." "Then we work fast." Shane nodded and walked toward the first cab. He climbed up the step, opened the door, and dragged the driver's limp body from the seat. It hit the pavement with a wet thud. Shane didn't react. He reached inside, put the truck in neutral, and began rocking the steering wheel until it rolled slowly into the ditch. Gary watched him, horrified and speechless. Tom took another truck, the one closest to the center. He moved methodically, carefully, as though he'd done this before. Open door, remove body, roll the rig, steer, guide, let gravity take it down. The rain softened the dirt in the ditch, making each truck sink slowly like a wounded animal, settling into mud. Gary stayed frozen for almost a full minute before forcing himself to move. He didn't want to drag bodies. He didn't want to touch them. But he knew if he didn't help, Tom and Shane would do it alone. And the thought of that, of abandoning his brothers, was worse than the horror in front of him. He approached a truck. The door creaked as he opened it. The driver inside was slumped to one side, blood streaked across the window. Gary's breath shook. His fingers hovered near the man's shirt before pulling back. "I can't," he whispered. Tom stepped up beside him. "I'll do it." Gary's chest tightened with shame. "I should—" "No," Tom said. "Not this one." It took them nearly 40 minutes to clear enough of the blockade to create a narrow path for their 3 trucks. By the end, 12 rigs sat crooked in the ditch, half buried in wet soil. 3 remained partially blocking the road, one's too damaged to move without towing. But the brothers maneuvered their trucks through the narrow corridor of broken metal and scattered debris. By the time they reached the other side, rain had washed streaks of blood across the pavement into long pink trails leading toward the fields. The Harris brothers climbed back into their cabs. The turbine load groaned under its straps. Thunder cracked overhead again. Tom keyed the CB mic. "Stay tight. Keep headlights off until we're past the ridge." Shane responded immediately. "Copy." Gary's voice came last, barely above a whisper. "Okay." Their engines rumbled to life, louder than the storm for a moment. The sound echoed over the plains like the waking growl of something dangerous. They pulled forward, leaving behind the darkness, the dead, and the remains of the blockade. For a brief moment, none of them spoke. Then Gary broke the silence, voice trembling through the static. "Tom, when the sun comes up, people will know." Tom didn't hesitate. "Then we better make sure we're gone by then." Shane added, "We'll be in Oklahoma City before dawn. Deliver the turbine. Finish the job." Gary swallowed. "And after that?" Thunder boomed again, closer now. Tom gave the same answer he'd given all his life when the future was uncertain. "We'll figure it out." But even he knew this time was different. There was no figuring it out. There was no going back. They had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. And somewhere behind them, in the rain and darkness, the first faint glow of approaching headlights appeared on the distant horizon. Someone else was coming. And whatever waited ahead on the highway, the Harris brothers would soon learn that the night's violence was only the beginning of the war they had started. The brothers drove in silence for the first miles beyond the blockade. The storm drifted eastward, leaving behind only a soaked highway and a low rumble of thunder that faded into the night. Their headlights remained off, just as Tom had ordered, so only fleeting pulses of lightning guided them across the dark stretch of 152. The road felt emptier than it ever had, cleansed of sound, of movement, of anything living. Shane kept his eyes glued to the narrow strip of pavement ahead, hands tight on the wheel. His heartbeat had finally slowed, settling into a steady rhythm that felt almost calm. A cold calm. A dangerous calm. The kind of calm a man feels when he convinces himself he did what he had to. Gary's truck drifted slightly in its lane. He wiped his glasses over and over, even though the rain had stopped. He kept seeing faces that blurred each time he blinked, merging with the smear of headlights from the trucks behind him. His breathing was uneven. Every small sound made him jump. The truck's engine noise felt too loud, like it was shouting their guilt into the universe. Tom drove with the same expression he'd worn throughout the night. Blank, solid, emotion buried somewhere too deep to reach. He scanned the empty road ahead with military precision. Every shadow, every signpost, every dip in the asphalt. He knew the highway like a second home, could navigate it blind if needed. But tonight, something in him felt foreign, like he was watching someone else's life unfold through a windshield smeared with rain. A faint buzz crackled through the CB. Gary flinched at the sound. Shane clicked his mic. "Who's on frequency?" Only static responded. Then the faint, distant voice of an unknown driver. "Breaker? Breaker? Anyone got eyes on 152? Hearing chatter about some kind of accident out there. Anyone confirm?" Shane's knuckles tightened. Tom immediately grabbed his mic. "Ignore it. Stay silent." Gary exhaled shakily. "Tom, they'll find it. They'll find all of it." "They will," Tom said. "But they won't find us." Shane added, "Not if we get to Oklahoma City before the sun's up." Gary pressed his forehead against the wheel. "We should have never—" Tom's voice cut sharply through the radio. "Not now." They drove another few miles before the storm clouds fully broke apart. The moon emerged, pale and distant, casting faint silver light across the asphalt. The visibility improved enough that Tom finally allowed headlights. When they flicked on, the brothers saw something that made all three of them tense simultaneously. Headlights on the horizon. A pair of them. Growing closer. Tom spoke immediately. "Stay calm. Keep the pace." The approaching vehicle was coming from behind. Whoever it was had been traveling the opposite direction earlier, then turned around. Could have been a farmer. Could have been a night shift worker, heading home. Could have been someone who'd heard the gunfire in the storm. Or it could have been someone who had already found the blockade. "Tom," Shane said quietly, "they're closing fast." "I see it." Gary couldn't help it. His breathing sped up again. What if they saw Gary? Tom's voice was firm. "Drive." The approaching headlights grew brighter. Brighter. Too bright. Too fast. "Tom," Shane said again, "that doesn't look like a farm truck." Tom narrowed his eyes. "No, it doesn't." The vehicle behind them was a white pickup, speeding, no hesitation, no slowing when it saw the oversized turbine load. It was as if the driver cared more about getting to the blockade than avoiding the enormous flatbed in front of him. And then it happened. The truck blasted past Shane, its engine roaring, and the brothers caught a glimpse of the driver. A man with a thick beard, eyes wide, phone pressed to his cheek. "Jesus," Gary whispered. "He's calling someone." Tom keyed his mic. "Let him go. Don't react. Don't turn. Don't follow." The white truck swerved around them and sped off into the darkness. Gary's voice shook. "Tom, he's going straight to the others. He's going to find the bodies." "He won't know it was us," Tom said. "Not yet." Shane wasn't as convinced, but he saw us. He saw our trucks. He'll remember. Tom didn't reply. Because Shane was right. The turbine load made them distinct, impossible to forget. The white pickup driver would put two and two together the moment he reached the wreckage. And once the news spread, law enforcement would follow the only oversized turbine haul scheduled for the night. Which meant the brothers weren't just fighting time. They were running from it. The road sloped upward toward a ridge, the highest point on the stretch. Beyond it lay farmland, ranch country, and finally city lights. But as they crested the hill, all three trucks slowed, because down below, in the valley ahead, a small cluster of red and blue flashes flickered, distant, faint, but unmistakable. Emergency lights. Shane muttered a curse. Gary choked on his breath. "No, no, no, no." Tom's jaw tightened. "They responded faster than I thought." "They're close, Tom," Shane said. "Too close." "Then we keep going." Gary stared at the lights, horrified. "We can't drive past them. They'll stop us." "They won't know what we're hauling," Tom said. "They won't assume anything. We pass like any other load going through." "But the pickup driver might not have reached them yet," Tom snapped. "Or maybe he didn't stop. Maybe he went straight through." Shane wasn't convinced. "Or maybe he told them already and they're waiting on us." The lights grew brighter as they descended the ridge, still distant but no longer ignorable. Whoever was down there was only a few miles from the massacre site. "Tom," Gary said, voice cracking, "turn around. Please, we can take a side road." "No side roads can handle the turbine." "Then hide, pull over, and wait for them to find us?" "No." Shane gripped his wheel tighter. "Tom, this is bad." "It's only bad if we panic," Tom said. "Stay in formation, slow down a touch, act normal." But nothing felt normal. Not the air, not the road, not the thundering of their engines, echoing too loudly in the quiet night. As they neared the bottom of the ridge, sirens began to faintly wail, far away but unmistakable. Gary let out a broken sound. "They're already moving. They're heading to the blockade." "Then we have minutes," Tom said. Lightning flashed again somewhere far behind them, illuminating the sky just enough for them to see the dirt roads branching off the highway. Roads that led into empty farmland, and eventually into country where no one would look for three trucks carrying a turbine. Shane said quietly, "Tom, we can disappear." Gary added, "Please." Tom didn't answer immediately. He looked ahead at the faint glow of Oklahoma City far off in the distance. He looked behind at the storm and the path of destruction they'd left. He looked to the side at the dark farmland stretching forever. And for the first time that night, uncertainty flickered in his eyes. "We're not disappearing," Tom finally said. "Not yet." Shane exhaled, bracing himself. Gary felt sick. Tom continued, "We'll take County Road 214 in half a mile. It'll give us distance, no patrols out there. Then we loop around." "Loop around where?" Gary asked. "To the customer," Tom said, "to finish the delivery." Gary stared forward, hollow. "We're really doing it. We're really finishing this run." Tom's voice was quiet, final. "We didn't kill 15 men to fail the job." The sirens grew louder in the distance. The brothers downshifted, signaling silently as they prepared to leave the highway. And as they veered off the main road, the red and blue flashes reflected across the wet pavement like a warning in the rearview mirrors they could no longer ignore. County Road 214 wasn't really a road, more like a long stretch of weather-beaten dirt cutting across cattle country. No lights, no fences, no signs. Just a wide, lonely vein of earth, weaving through fields that stretched out like a dark ocean. As the Harris brothers turned off the highway, their tires sank slightly into the wet ground, kicking up thick clumps of mud. The turbine load groaned behind Tom's truck, its weight shifting with each bump. Even in the dark, the massive cylinder gleamed faintly whenever the moon broke through the clouds. It was the only thing on the plains large enough to reflect the sky. They drove slowly to avoid sinking. The engines growled, determined, but strained. Shane broke the silence. "Someone's going to figure it out, Tom." Tom didn't respond. Gary wiped his face with his sleeve, though the sweat and rain kept coming. His voice crackled over the CB. "Tom, what if they took pictures? License plates? Our trucks look different. They'll know the turbine load was ours. We're miles away now, but when they find it, they'll start asking questions." Tom's voice was steady but not comforting. "They ask questions every day. Doesn't mean they get answers." Shane exhaled sharply. "You're acting like this is just business. Like this was a flat tire we fixed." Tom didn't answer, because deep down they all knew the truth. This wasn't a job anymore. This was an escape, a rolling crime scene trying to outrun its shadow. A gust of wind hit from the north, shaking the trucks. A new storm was forming, smaller, but colder. It carried a sharp bite, the kind that hinted at hail. The roads would only get worse. Gary's voice broke through again, shattering the fragile quiet. "I keep hearing them, Tom. I keep hearing them screaming." "It's the wind," Tom said. "No, it's not. No, it's not, goddammit." Gary's voice cracked. "We dragged bodies, Tom. I dragged a man out of his seat by his shirt. He looked right at me before he—" "Enough," Tom snapped. Gary went silent, breathing unevenly. They kept moving deeper into the countryside. Every mile put them farther from the massacre, but closer to the truth that they were no longer drivers hauling freight. They were fugitives. Lightning flashed again. Not behind them this time, but ahead, illuminating a cluster of abandoned barns and rusted-out tractors, ghosts of old farmsteads long since surrendered to drought and foreclosure. Shane adjusted his grip on the wheel. "This route takes us past the old Walker Ranch." Tom nodded. "That's where we break." "Break?" Gary asked, exhausted. Break for what? To swap plates, clean the trucks, get mud on the wheels, make it harder to match tire impressions. Gary stared ahead, horror settling into his bones. We're covering tracks now. Would you prefer they follow them straight to us? Tom asked. Gary couldn't answer. They reached the ranch 20 minutes later. The windmill creaked in the breeze, its blades rusted stiff. The barns were collapsing inward like dying animals. The brothers idled their trucks near the tree line, shutting off the engines one by one. Darkness swallowed them again, broken only by the ticking of cooling engines and the distant hum of insects. Shane hopped out of his cab instantly, restless. He grabbed a crowbar from his toolbox and walked toward the front of his truck. Gary stepped out slower, trembling slightly, his boots sinking into the wet ground. Tom walked with the weight of someone carrying far more than tools. Shane pried off his front plate with a violent yank. We ditch these. Burn them. Gary shook his head. Burning plates won't erase what happened. Shane stopped, breathing hard. You want them finding our trucks on camera? You want helicopters above us by morning? Gary didn't argue. Tom walked toward the barn and examined a pile of rotting timbers. He knelt down, found a broken fuel can among the debris, and sniffed the contents. Diesel. Lucky night, he muttered. He poured a small puddle into an old metal trough and set the license plates inside. Then he struck a match. The flame twisted upward, pushing back the darkness for a moment, before settling into a steady burn. Gary watched, arms wrapped around himself. Everything we've done tonight keeps getting worse. Shane dropped his plate into the fire, sparks jumping. Tom added his without a word. The flames reflected in his eyes, orange, flickering, hungry. The same look he'd carried since Vietnam. Gary finally spoke again, his voice thin. Tom, when we deliver the turbine, what then? We go home? Pretend none of this happened? We don't pretend, Tom said. We assess, we lay low, we plan. Plan what? Gary asked. To live normal lives after killing 15 men? Tom didn't blink. If we have to. Shane kicked at the dirt. We didn't start this war, they did. Gary snapped back. They were protesting freight rates, Shane. They were begging the state to listen to them. They blocked us, Shane barked. That was their decision. Gary's voice rose for the first time all night. That wasn't a death sentence. Shane turned away, jaw clenched, eyes cold. It was for us. Tom stepped between them. Enough. Both of you. The wind rose suddenly, whipping dust around their legs. The fire crackled louder as the flames ate through metal, paint, and gilt. A faint chirp sounded in the distance. Gary froze. You hear that? Tom lifted his head. Another chirp. Higher, repeating, closer. Shane spun toward the trucks. CB signal? No, Tom said. Scanner. Gary's heartbeat spiked. But none of us turned on a scanner. The chirping grew louder. A radio inside one of the trucks crackled. A voice, unfamiliar, distant, full of static, broke through. Units responding. 15 confirmed. Possible suspects headed eastbound. Witness described. Shane lunged toward his cab, yanking open the door. The radio continued. 3 semis, 1 oversized load, last seen near the 152, repeat, oversized load. Gary stumbled backward. "They know! Tom, they know!" Shane slammed his fist into the dashboard. "Son of a—" The radio continued. "Suspects armed. Dangerous. All units advised block major routes. Aircraft on standby." Tom didn't move for several seconds. He just listened, letting the information wash over him like a cold wave. Finally, he spoke. "We leave. Now." Gary stared at him, pale. "Tom, aircraft? Aircraft? They'll see the load from the sky." Tom stepped forward, gripping Gary by the collar, not angrily, but firmly. "We finish the run," Tom said. "We get paid, and then we disappear. Understand?" Gary trembled. "Tom, this is insane." Tom tightened his grip. "We didn't bleed tonight to die tomorrow." Gary swallowed, eyes wide with fear. Shane climbed back into his cab and fired up the engine, the sound echoing across the dead ranch. Tom released Gary and headed for his own truck. Gary stared at the fire for one long, agonizing moment. The flames consuming their plates, their evidence, their ties to the law. Then he turned and followed his brothers. 3 engines roared to life. The Harris brothers pulled away from the ranch, leaving behind fire, ashes, and the first cold breath of dawn creeping over the plains. They were no longer outrunning time. They were outrunning the entire state of Oklahoma. And the sky above them was no longer empty. Something unseen was watching now, something closing in. The sky was beginning to lighten, an early bruised shade of blue creeping across the horizon. Dawn was still an hour away, but the plains were no longer cloaked in full darkness. This was the most dangerous time of all. Too bright to hide, too dim to identify threats, too quiet for comfort. The Harris brothers rolled north along a narrow county road, their headlights off again. The turbine load cast a long, distorted shadow across the wet ground, stretching like a massive iron spine across the earth. The wind had died down, replaced by a steady, unnerving stillness. Even the insects seemed to hold their breath. Gary drove like a ghost, eyes wide, hands shaking on the wheel, heart hammering in his chest. His mind replayed the blockade over and over. He tried to focus on the road, but every flicker of light and every distant noise tore him back into the nightmare. Shane, by contrast, looked carved from stone, eyes unblinking, shoulders squared, his jaw set in a permanent clench. If he felt fear, he buried it deep, too deep. Tom drove with surgical precision, calculating, scanning, planning. They were less than 30 miles from the delivery site, a remote energy facility outside Oklahoma City, when the first sign appeared, literally. A glowing orange "Roadwork Ahead" sign stood on the shoulder, flapping slightly in the early morning breeze. Gary spoke first. "Tom, there's never construction out here. I see it. Maybe we reroute," Shane said. "No," Tom answered immediately. "We stay the path. But that sign, it's nothing. Probably for the eastbound lane." But Gary wasn't convinced. "Tom, that sign wasn't here last week, or the week before." Shane's voice dropped. "You think it's them?" "It's possible," Gary whispered. They slowed slightly as they approached the next bend. Shane gripped his CB mic tightly. "Tom, if this is a roadblock, The sentence never finished, because as they turned the corner, they saw it. 2 trucks, hazard lights strobing red in the dim light. Not semis, county vehicles. A pair of flatbeds with reflective strips and highway maintenance painted across the sides. No workers, no cones, no equipment, just the trucks, parked diagonally across the road, blocking it completely. Gary's voice cracked. "Oh God, they found us." Shane slammed his fist against the steering wheel. "This is a trap." Tom immediately keyed his mic. "Listen to me. Stay calm. Engines running. Nobody steps out." "But Tom, nobody steps out." The 3 trucks idled in the road, engines humming in unsteady sync. A bird cawed somewhere in the distance, an eerie sound against the tension. Then a second noise joined it, a faint buzzing. Gary turned his head upward. "No," he whispered. The buzzing grew louder, then deafening. Shane looked through his side window and saw it before anyone else, a spotlight slicing through the sky. "Tom!" he shouted. "Aircraft!" The helicopter banked hard from the east, its rotors chopping the morning air, whipping dust into swirling clouds. A massive searchlight swung toward the Harris brothers' position, illuminating the turbine load as if marking it for the whole world to see. Gary screamed, "They're here! They're here! Tom! They're here!" The floodlight washed over the trucks, blinding them, casting long shadows across the road. A voice boomed from the helicopter's PA system. "Drivers of the 3 semi-trucks, stop your vehicles. Turn off your engines. Do not attempt to flee." Shane grabbed his rifle instinctively, knuckles white. "We can't stop, Tom. We stop, we die." Gary was sobbing. "What are we going to do? What are we going to—" "Quiet!" Tom barked. The helicopter circled lower, blades roaring like thunder. "This is the Oklahoma Highway Patrol. Turn off your vehicles. Exit with your hands up." Police. Not local deputies. State. And they had air support. Tom closed his eyes for a brief moment. A long breath. A painful breath. One that carried the weight of every decision he'd made tonight. Then he keyed the mic. "We push straight through them." Shane didn't hesitate. "Understood." Gary's voice cracked. Tom, no. That's suicide." "Gary, listen to me. They don't have barricades set. They don't have spike strips. Those trucks aren't reinforced. They're standard county vehicles." "But we'll be driving toward the helicopter. They'll fire at us, Tom. They'll shoot us like dogs on the road." "Then we keep our heads down." Gary was shaking uncontrollably. "We can't do this, Tom. Please, we can't." Tom's voice softened, but only slightly. "Gary, look at me." Gary swallowed. "We can't go back," Tom said. "We can't undo it. And if they arrest us now, everything ends. We can negotiate." "No, we can't." Gary's breath hitched. Tom continued, voice low and heavy. "We finish this. The turbine gets delivered. Then we disappear. After that, we deal with the consequences we can live with." Gary stared at the roadblock, his vision shaking. "How do we live with any of this?" he whispered. Tom didn't answer. He couldn't. Shane revved his engine loudly, a warning, a challenge, a declaration. The helicopter spotlight snapped fully onto Tom's cab. State patrol vehicles were approaching now, dark shapes behind the work trucks. Time was gone. Choices were gone. Only momentum remained. Tom gripped the mic one more time. On my mark. Shane slammed his fist on the horn. A long, angry blast ripped across the fields. Gary whispered through tears. God forgive us, Tom growled. Mark! 3 engines roared simultaneously. Shane's truck lurched forward, tires clawing at the muddy road. Gary hesitated. Go, Gary! Tom roared. Gary screamed and floored it. Tom followed, the turbine load rattling as it picked up speed. The helicopter swerved, spotlight trying to track all 3 at once. The county trucks loomed ahead. Police shouted. The PA system screamed. The sirens wailed. Shane hit the first work truck head-on, metal shrieking as it buckled under the force. His truck plowed through it, pushing it sideways off the road like crumpled aluminum. Gary clipped the second truck, sending it spinning into the ditch. Tom barreled straight through the middle, debris exploding outward. The brothers kept moving. Behind them, the helicopter roared in fury. Ahead of them, the road cleared. For a moment, just one impossible, fleeting moment, it looked like they might actually outrun fate. Then the helicopter dipped low. Too low. A blast of wind and metal struck Tom's truck as the aircraft dropped into their path, forcing them to swerve violently. The turbine load shifted, screaming, groaning, its massive weight throwing the entire convoy off balance. Shane shouted over the radio, "Tom!" Gary screamed, "Look out!" The turbine's front strap snapped, a sound like a gunshot, then another. Then the world exploded. The turbine rolled sideways, pulling Tom's truck with it, flipping the entire rig like a toy. Metal twisted, glass shattered. The earth shook as thousands of pounds slammed onto the road. Shane's truck jackknifed, trying to avoid the wreck. Gary's truck skidded, lost control, and overturned, rolling 3 times into a shallow ditch. The helicopter banked away to avoid the debris field. Silence followed. A long, agonizing silence. Then the first officer shouted, "We need EMTs now! Multiple vehicles down!" The Harris brothers lay trapped in twisted metal and shattered glass, broken by the very load they fought so brutally to protect. The turbine that was supposed to save their business had crushed their escape, their future, and their war in an instant. The sun finally broke over the horizon, its first light touching the wreckage of the Oklahoma freight war. 15 men died on the highway that night, and by sunrise, the Harris brothers had joined them. The road was quiet once more. But the story of what happened on Highway 152 would haunt Oklahoma for decades to come. And no one who ever heard it would forget how a blockade, a storm, and 3 desperate men turned a simple stretch of asphalt into a battlefield drenched in blood and fire.